Welcome to our final online lesson for the Cold War. Today we're going to be looking at the Cold War during the presidencies of Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, and Bush. We're kind of lumping them all together today, and we're going to be hitting on the high points of each one. Let's get started. So we'll be focusing primarily on the major domestic and foreign events that occurred during each president's reign. So let's go ahead and start with President Nixon. So during his presidency, the Cold War took a turn. We were still involved in Vietnam, and he started this policy of Vietnamization. And what this was a policy that he created, or his administration created, that was during the Vietnam War as a result of the Viet Cong's Tet Offensive to expand, equip, and train South Vietnam's forces and assign to them an ever-increasing combat role, at the same time steadily reducing the number of United States troops in combat. So it's kind of preparing them to fight on their own, and then it's pulling ourselves out. Kind of what we did with Iraq. We've been helping that army kind of rebuild itself, be ready to patrol, and we're pulling ourselves out at the same time. Also during his presidency was a period of détente, which was known as easing of tensions between the United States and the USSR. With the assistance of Henry Kissinger, a former Harvard professor, Nixon sets out to extend an olive branch to China and the Soviet Union. Again, like I said, they developed this policy of détente, known as easing of tensions between the superpowers. This is something that's going to be important that you're going to have to make sure you remember. In 1972, he then traveled to Moscow for a summit with the Soviet leaders where the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty was signed. This is also known as the SALT Treaty, and it was a plan to limit the number of nuclear arms in both the United States and the Soviet Union. However, his presidency was also marked by tragedy and scandal, and this scandal is known as Watergate. In June 17, 1972, 5 of his supporters, when he's running for re-election, broke into the Democratic Party's headquarters at Watergate looking for sensitive campaign information to use against George McGovern, the person who was running against him. With rumors swirling, he orders a cover-up because they were caught and arrested. People are swirling saying, oh, Nixon told them to do that, or the White House had a hand in this. And he had evidence destroyed, and he had officials give false testimony. And Nixon, he then wins re-election. However, during that term, his second term, the scandal begins to unravel. As the burglars went on trial, allegations of Nixon's involvement surfaced. So people are starting to point the finger at Nixon. And the court requested the tapes. There were tapes that President Nixon had from the White House that he used to record what was going on for his memoirs. And they asked that he turn those tapes over, and hey, if you're innocent, turn them over, prove you're innocent. However, he refused, and he claimed executive privilege, saying that the conversation on the tape should be kept private. In 1974, he then released edited tapes. So not the originals, but the edited ones. But he refused to turn over the unedited tapes. Again, that puts him at odds with a lot of people. He was then charged with presidential misconduct. He was on the road to being impeached. However, before he was fully impeached and taken out of office, August 9th, 1974, Nixon resigned in disgrace, and Jerry Ford becomes the president. That's what we're going to next. So the one thing that we need to focus on with the Cold War during the presidency of Ford, he pardoned Nixon. On September 8th, 1974, Ford announced that he would grant a full, free, and absolute pardon to President Nixon. His approval rating then went from 71% to 50% because of this. So many people hated Nixon for the Watergate scandal. So after Ford, there was Jimmy Carter. And Jimmy Carter, during his presidency, had to deal with the energy crisis during the Cold War. He created the Department of Energy in hopes to conserve oil and promote the use of coal and renewable energy sources such as solar power. Furthermore, during his presidency, he was a great diplomat in the sense, especially with the Camp David Accord. And this was a peace treaty he helped create between Israel and Egypt. And this was the first step to achieving peace in the Middle East. Peace in the Middle East. However, during his presidency, there was also some turmoil. Soviets invaded Afghanistan in 1979. And Carter condemns this and imposes an embargo. And we've heard embargo before when we were talking about Japan during World War II. He puts an embargo on the sale of grain to the USSR, and he boycotts the 1980 Olympic Games in Moscow. So we did not attend the 19 Olympic Games in Moscow. Many athletes missed out on a chance to compete that year. And finally, there was the Iranian hostage crisis. And when the Shah of Iran, who was friendly with the United States, fled the country in 1979, Islamic revolutionaries stormed the U.S. embassy in Iran. In 1980, the Carter administration attempted a rescue mission, which was a huge failure because most of the helicopters crashed on their way out or way in, and people were killed in the desert. So it was a very big tragedy. After Carter, there was President Ronald Reagan. Also, he was known as being an actor, and during his presidency, he tried to develop and cement in his idea of Reaganomics economics. And this was also known as trickle-down economics. Sound familiar? We've heard that before, I think. So if you've got your elite, so if you've got like your little triangle here, and at the top are your big businesses, so right here your big businesses, and he's hoping that you put the money into the top of the economy, and then it will eventually trickle down to everyone else. However, this was a huge failure as it was before. During his presidency, there was a new Soviet leader, and this was Mikhail Gorbachev, and he developed the policy of glasnost. Gorbachev became the new Soviet leader in 1985, and under his policy of glasnost, citizens were allowed to have freedom of religion, speech, and discussion of politics openly. This hadn't been allowed in the Soviet Union for decades, so this was a huge step in kind of bringing that communism era of the Soviet Union to a close. And rounding out the last of our presidents was President George H.W. Bush. The Cold War events during his presidency, first, the fall of the Berlin Wall. Eastern Germany in 1989, keep in mind they were separated, pressured their government to open the gates to West Germany. On November 9th, 1989, the gates were thrown down and the wall was brought down. So here's a picture of people climbing the wall and they're beginning to destroy it. There was also the fall of the Soviet Union. A coup, C-O-U-P, coup, staged by communist officials to overthrow Gorbachev occurred in 1991, and he was the current Soviet leader. Boris Yeltsin defied the officials from parliament, and he stayed, and 50,000 supporters surrounded parliament to protect Yeltsin, and the coup collapsed and Gorbachev returned. In 1991, Gorbachev announced an end to the Soviet Union, and now they are known as Russia. Finally, I'd like to finish up this with kind of more of a current event. This was the first Persian Gulf War. To protect its oil reserves in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, President Bush sent soldiers into Kuwait after an Iraqi invasion by Saddam Hussein in 1990. This became known as Operation Desert Storm, and within 100 hours of landing troops, Kuwait was declared liberated. If you've ever seen the movie Jarhead, the battle scene as they get towards the end of the movie, that was during Desert Storm. So if you want to check that out, feel free. So, this is what we've covered so far. This was our last lesson. So we defined détente. What was the significance of the SALT Treaty? Watergate scandal. What about Ford's approval rating? The camp during President Carter's reign, Camp David Accord, Soviets invade Afghanistan, Iranian hostage crisis. Reagan. What is another phrase for Reaganomics? Glasnost. And finally, President Bush. I hope you have enjoyed these lessons. That will be all for this unit on the Cold War. We'll see you next time.